Mr. James Gunn, this has been a long time coming. We've been talking about doing the podcast for a while. I've been pestering you, so I'm glad we're here. We made it.
We made it. Yeah, this is it. This is it. Finally,
Okay.
I'm talking to people, for like, whatever, 4 years now. I've been telling everyone, not doing any podcasts, not doing any interviews. No. And now finally I'm doing a few things, but not too many still, Josh. So.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate you making the time, man. And congratulations on The Suicide Squad, another exceptional piece of work. And it is a James Gunn film through and through, and that is a high compliment coming from me. And I will say, like, it's been a minute since I've seen you, and I feel like you've risen like Gandalf. You're like Gandalf the White now. You are reborn, my friend. This is
from the
James
ashes.
Gunn.
From the ashes. That's right. The phoenix arises.
Does it feel like, I mean, you've been on a journey? Well, we'll get to the last few years, but let's go a little bit more wide first, because look at like James Gunn 10 years ago. It's fascinating to think about 10 years ago, Super comes out. It makes I love it, but it makes less than 600K at the box office. It is not.
Yeah. Although it did, I will say Super did pretty well on VOD, which is where the box office was just sort of advertising for the VOD. So it did okay. Considering the movie only cost $3 million, it did pretty well. It didn't feel like what Slither felt like, which was not a hit,
But you were perceived a different way prior to Guardians, as this kind of like guy on the outskirts, this perverse kind of ex-trauma guy.
Iconoclast, yes.
Exactly. Does it boggle your mind to this day, like where you stand, where you sit, and like you are the center of pop culture? It doesn't get any more centered than the movies you've made the last decade.
I just don't perceive it, and I just don't look. I try as little as possible to think of myself how other people think of myself. In a lot of ways, it just so doesn't matter to my life.
Right.
But it wasn't that I always wanted to make bigger movies. It's not that I didn't want to make movies that were more mainstream or whatever you might think. Like that was always a part of my plan for myself. It just didn't, it just took a few years to get there.
Do you think though, like that sensibilities have also changed a bit?
Hugely. I think if Super came out today, it would be perceived much differently. I mean, listen, you go back to 1998, I made a movie called The Specials, which was a commentary on superheroes, made like before real superhero movies were out, really. So yes, I've always, just because now comic book culture, which was the culture that I grew up with through reading comic books, not through seeing movies. Now comic book culture is made mainstream through movies, not through comic books. So all of those sort of themes and weird things that interested me about comic book superheroes. What is it, with Frank Darbo and Super, what does it really mean to be a vigilante? A guy who beats up people for doing what he thinks of as wrong. What is that like in real life? I think that's a much more interesting premise to people today than it was when I made that movie, who didn't have anything to compare it with.
It also, though, you would admit, I would think that like as the years have progressed, you've also found a way to inject more heart, more emotion in these films that still have like a perverse nature at times. You found a way to have them commingle, and that's maybe your greatest accomplishment, I would argue, the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think I'm just much more emotionally grounded. I mean, that's me. I mean, but if you look back at my first movie, Romeo and Juliet, you look back at The Specials, you look back at Super, those all have really emotional aspects to them. I mean, like really, it could be argued that the emotionality of Super was the main, the primary aspect of that film. So that emotionalism was always there. It was always present. I've always been an emotional person, but I think that I am a little bit less, I don't want to say I'm less punk rock, but whatever. There was always a need to like push somebody's buttons to mess with someone. Like there's an aggressiveness I had both as a person and in my work earlier on that I let go of, and that's for a lot of reasons, but I don't deal with things aggressively in my life generally.
Right.
So
that's a part of maturity for all of us. I mean, like that's just everyone's 20s is about just like, fuck the system. I need to like rebel against everything. And at a certain point, you're like, I can still be that, but everything doesn't have to be a fuck you to the world.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get excited by offending people.
Right. Right. So let's talk. So when you get into Guardians, and I promise we'll get obviously into Suicide Squad, but like when you get in there, when you look back on that experience, is there anything about helming that film that you cringe at in terms of like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing in that, at least that respect? Obviously it came out pretty damn well, but like, was there anything you were kind of like, no, you were ready. You had all the tools.
Totally ready. I had every tool available to me to do that movie. So I had been making, I think if you ask me the one thing that I cringe about, it probably isn't the thing that you would expect, but I've been far under budget on all of my movies, including Suicide Squad. And that's a very unusual thing in Hollywood. But I'm not very selfish. I have a producer hat on because I started making $350,000 movies. I made an entire feature film for $1,500 one time. So I always have this producer hat on to like rush and get things done. And at times that took precedence over taking my time and making sure I got done what I did correctly. And that could be in a shot, that could be in somebody's performance. And it also caused me a lot of grief. I didn't enjoy the experience because I was so filled with fear about getting that next shot.
Right.
So I think that was really, it took me through past Guardians 2 to get rid of that completely. And I'm still under budget. I'm still fast, and I love being fast. It's cool. I feel responsible doing it. I like doing it. It makes it more fun to make a movie. But if I don't get something, I take my time and I make sure I get it right.
I would assume also the pleasant, hopefully not surprised, because you were hoping, I'm sure, going into Guardians that you would maintain some authorship over it, but like it's still kind of shocking to think that again you were able to make your film even within the context of the larger MCU. Did you have trepidation at the time that you were going to be able to be true to yourself, or were you like kind of stealing yourself for like at some point they're going to come in and kind of like
listen,
take this thing over?
I went in and pitched totally what Guardians was to Kevin and Lou. Now, today I might go, you hear stories about people that pitch exactly what they want and then the studio buys into that and then wants something totally different.
Right.
Maybe I was too naive for that, but I told them exactly what the movie was going to be from the beginning. I knew, and I honestly felt like I was created in a lab. I was grown in a petri dish to make Guardians of the Galaxy. I knew that no one else could do with that movie what I was going to do. So I was incredibly confident with it. I'm maybe overconfident with a lot of things anyway, but I was incredibly confident. And the way I kind of get away doing what I want to do is I'm just never the squeaky wheel. I mean, they had other productions happening at the same time, and they were much more problematic, and I was just not going to be the squeaky wheel. So I sit back, I get all my footage done every day. I make sure the dailies look good, and then I don't get screwed with. And that was the way that was back then. Still, there are things that, I agreed to that small regrets of things that I agreed to that, I wish I hadn't, but nothing very big with Guardians Volume 1.
You obviously have a knack for casting. If you look at Guardians, you go all the way up to the Suicide Squad. And now there's like so much lore about the casting of that first Guardians. I mean, people have talked about the auditions and everything. We know that Glenn Howerton was your kind of second choice for Quill. Yeah. I mean, they're fascinating things like, I guess Chadwick was up for Drax, which is fascinating. I mean, do you remember that? Do you remember his take on Drax?
I don't remember it. Until now, I thought I met Chadwick at the Hollywood Blockbuster Awards. And, when he was first got the role of Black Panther, and he and Chris Pratt and I hung out. So I don't remember him auditioning for Drax at all.
Was Glenn's take on Peter Quill that much different than Pratt's? I mean, obviously you were into it and you would have been happy with it, sounds like, but it would have been I assume it would have been a different guy.
It would have been a different guy. Yeah. Definitely would have been a different guy. But that was part of the thing. I mean, for Peter Quill, I wanted somebody to come in and fill it with their own personality. It couldn't just be, Rocket and Groot are much more like, hey, there's got to be this thing, and they're fitting into the tight little box. But with him, that wasn't so much the case. With Gamora, that wasn't so much the case.
What was the hardest person to cast in that in that cast? Like, what was the biggest, I don't want to say fight, but what was the biggest kind of back and forth discussion that in the
Oh,
end?
there's no doubt. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Dave Bautista and I are so tight today, is because Marvel didn't want to cast Dave Bautista, and they didn't really want to cast Michael Rooker either. So those were bad. They didn't want to cast Karen Gillan either. So those were all battles that I had to fight to get those people cast. Chris was a little bit easier. Zoe was very easy. But the rest of them were there was some never, like, listen, I mean, it's like, you know, people, I say things like that, and then people's ideas that we were arguing and fighting. No, it was always so friendly and so open, and, you know, they just.
I'm sure it's these fun, exciting, like you're like kids in like a boardroom, like, oh my God, wouldn't it be cool for this person to be that person? Yeah, it'd be cool, but maybe this is the better way to go.
Yeah, like, so it was always pretty friendly, you know. But Dave was definitely the hardest, because there was specifically somebody else they wanted to cast in that role that I preferred Dave.
The one other one I wanted to mention is it true that Alan Rickman was up for a role, that you were thinking about casting him in Guardians?
You know, when people, I don't know, who would have he been? Not that I remember. No.
Okay.
I don't think so. But, like, you know, again, when you say considering, to be like Sarah Finn or whoever my, you know, casting person is in at the time comes in with a booklet that's thick,
right,
with the names of people that are being considered for Peter Quill. So all the time I hear somebody was considered for Peter Quill, or they were, you know, being, you know, but like we literally had over, you know, hundreds of auditions for Peter Quill.
Right.
You know,
right.
So I don't know, you know.
So let's jump ahead to the birth of this one. So the Suicide Squad, as is well known for those that don't know, is kind of birthed out of arguably the darkest kind of career moment for you, a definite down moment. It's almost 3 years exactly. I remember I was at Comic-Con. I think I was scheduled to talk to you like in a day. The next day, oh, right. There's James is on the schedule. We're going to talk Brightburn. It's going to be awesome. And then, like everybody, I saw the deadline headline come across that you were out. Were you in San Diego already? Can you?
I was supposed to be taking. I can't remember. I was supposed to be taking a plane. I think a plane the next day to San Diego. So we were supposed to get on the plane. Yeah, I think we were taking a jet. I was supposed to get on the plane with my brother Brian and my cousin Mark, who wrote the screenplay, the director Dave, and we were going to, and I'm sure, you know, some of the actors, and we were going to fly out there, and yeah, didn't happen.
Did you feel it could be over? Like the career could legitimately?
100% thought it was over. 100% thought it was totally done. 100% was like, I got to think about what I'm going to do next. And 100% thought I have to, you know, I might have to sell my house and figure out how I can conserve the money that I'd made so far to last for the rest of my life.
That's crazy. Who's the first person that kind of, do you remember, reached out that started to make you feel like, okay, some people have my back and maybe I'll be okay?
Michaela Hoover, who most people don't know, but as they know, she's a good friend of, some people know she's a good friend of mine. She's been in a lot of my movies. She reached out immediately. Bautista, Chris Pratt reached out. Oh, you know what? She reached out like the night it was happening. But then when I got fired, Chris called me immediately and Zoe called me immediately. And Zoe was crying. And then Karen Gillan called me, and she was crying. It really was. And then Dave was tweeting about it. So Palm, I talked to immediately. I talked to all of the Guardians immediately. But it was also like my agents and Sylvester Stallone, you know, sent me a video. My buddy Michael Rosen. I mean, it really was all the people in my life that I'm close to. And I feel bad every time I say, oh, look at all these famous people, because there was a lot of non-famous people, you know, my mom and my dad, my brothers and my sister, you know, my girlfriend Jen, of course, was the most, you know, she had to go through it with me. So there were a lot of people, and then a lot of people that were not, you know, who I didn't know, who were, you know, involved in the media and stuff, strange stuff like that, which was cool.
I guess if there's a takeaway, it's a message for folks. It's good to be kind to other people because they'll have your back when when you need them.
Yeah.
That karma
Well, I mean, that was
clearly
the
came
lesson.
around. Yeah.
That was a lesson for me, really. And that this is like me being 100%, you know, as raw as I can be. You know, I had spent my whole life seeking fortune and fame. And
Right.
I'm a creative guy. I love, you know, making movies and telling stories. But there was a part part of it I was using to try to fill a hole in me that didn't feel loved by other people. And either because I am some strange place on the spectrum or because of my relationship with my parents or whatever, I never was able to experience feeling loved. And when that happened, I felt like everything in my life had been taken from me at one time. But in that moment, all of a sudden, all these people loved me in a moment when I thought my career was over.
Yeah.
And I felt loved for the first time in my life. And it was an incredibly empowering experience. And I went to sleep that night. Then this is the weirdest part. I thought I had lost everything. I went to sleep pretty happy that night because I never knew people loved me. And I suddenly was able to experience that. And that affected everything afterwards.
It's funny. I mean, we'll jump more into like the specifics of Suicide Squad. But as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about the film and like these kind of unlovable characters, certain of which like do find like someone to love them by the end of it. So it's clear that was resonating as you were writing this. But we'll get to that. First, I'm just curious. So DC comes calling. How does that go down? Do they say like, look, we're open to you. We love what you do. Here's our what do you want to do? Because I've heard Superman talked about. Do they immediately say Superman?
It's real easy. So my manager is Peter Safran. He's also the producer of the Suicide. Right. Peter's been my manager since 1998. We're one of my closest friends. He works out at Warner Brothers in the morning. Toby Emmerich comes out and works out in the same gym as he does every morning. Every morning, Toby Emmerich came in, starting that Monday after, saying, James Gunn Superman, James Gunn Superman, James Gunn Superman. And Peter would laugh. And then he said, Toby said, but seriously, whatever James wants to do, he can come and do, you know, just tell us what he wants to do. He's like, we'd love him to do Superman. We'd love him to do, we want to do a Suicide Squad sequel. We'd love him to do that. But, you know, whatever he wants to do. And so with that, I went and I sat down and I thought about all of the different projects that I was considering. And they weren't actually all Warner Brothers projects. There was a couple of other things I was considering as well. And so I kind of sat down with these different ideas because a problem I've had at times in the past is I've committed to a good idea and then found out I don't really know how to implement it. This was more a problem I had as a writer than as a director. But I didn't want to commit myself to doing something for so long if I didn't really love the story. And I started to fall in love with Suicide Squad. And I called up, you know, Walter Hamada, and I said, what do I have to keep? I watched the last movie for the first time. And I said, you know, what do I have to keep from the movie? And what do I not have to keep? And he said, you don't have to keep anything. He said, you could change everybody. You could change nobody. We love Margot. We'd love it if she was in the movie, but you don't have to keep her. You can do whatever you want. And so from that, then I went and just started writing this story, and it just took off, and it was more exciting to me than all the other ideas I was working on. And it just became really clear which thing I was most passionate about.
How far did you go down the road of, because like with alongside Batman, Superman's the crown jewel. Like he's like the most iconic superhero on the planet. So I would imagine there's some temptation to be like, oh, let me see what I can do with that. Did it feel like there was unexplored territory that was interesting for you for Superman?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it before, but I considered doing a crypto movie, which I thought would have been really fun. So, but that shows you where my head's at. I wasn't that interested in doing Superman.
Let me go mainstream. The mainstream superhero's dog.
A superpowered dog running around a city, destroying it. While that's from Krypton, while Superman tries to track him down and get him. That seemed interesting to me. So, you know, I'm not saying I would never be interested in Superman. And if it was Batman, which Matt was already doing, it might have been I might have felt differently about it because I understand Batman. You know, I understand Harley Quinn. Like, I don't understand every character.
So you land on Suicide Squad. It's fascinating to me that, like, first of all, that they even offered it up, because at the time you could perceive it as having some baggage. While the box office was good, obviously it wasn't like the most critically acclaimed film. David's struggles with the studio are famous.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt. I mean, that still is part of it today. I mean, first of all, there's no greater guy than David Ayer. He's been the best guy to me in the world. He's an extremely talented filmmaker, but everybody knows he has struggles. That affects the title,
Yeah.
And so that's, part of what this was.
How did you feel like your way into like navigating that baggage was? Did it feel like you have to like implement certain things in order to kind of like make people realize, okay, we're kind of starting from scratch, or not? No, just make the best movie you can, trust in that.
100%. Like that from the beginning, that wasn't my business. If Warner Brothers has problems because of the first movie or whatever, that's like really up to them to figure out and fix, and fix or not fix. Like that's up to them. I can just tell the best story I can. And I wasn't going to be telling a story that was a shadow of David's movies that I'm like, oh, I'm trying to react to things that didn't work in your movie and make them differently. I just wanted to tell the story of the Suicide Squad that I wanted to tell and always wanted to tell. And, I was jealous when David got that gig, because they're one of my favorite comics. And so I was like, oh, I always thought that would make a great movie. Well, I'm excited to see the movie because, somebody else is doing it. But, I felt like that was Shazam, always thought Shazam would make a great property. Always was excited about the potential of doing it. And then, they made the movie and I thought it was great. So it's just, I can't do everything I dream about doing.
Right. It's more of a, it's more of a men and women on a mission film than it is a superhero or supervillain team movie. It's more of that. Would you agree? Was that more of your reference points? Dirty Dozen more than Avengers, clearly.
100%. It's a war caper film with Z-grade supervillains, and they're just a bunch of sad sack soldiers at the end of the day who have problems connecting with each other. So I think that, yeah, for sure, that's the genre engine that drives the movie. Much more so than a superhero film. There's nothing really about the general superhero film engine that drives this film.
I sent you a message after I saw it. There were a lot of things I loved about it. One of the things that jumped out to me was Idris, who I feel like is, I'm always rooting for him. He's delivered some great performances, but I feel like in the mainstream stuff, he's not been well served. And I feel like most folks, for whatever reason, it just hasn't clicked. They haven't found the right kind of big thing for him. And I just loved him in this movie. He's like, to me, he's like Snake Plissken and Han Solo somewhere, like fused together. The classic kind of reluctant hero. He is a bastard like all of them. Can you talk to me about like what you were? You get the most out of your actors. Like I could go down the list and say like a half dozen different actors I've never seen better before. But tell me a little bit about Idris and Bloodsport.
Well, Idris is a guy who I've wanted to work with for a long time. I thought he was a star when I saw him in Stringer Bell on The Wire, and I've loved him ever since then. My ex-wife is Jenna Fisher on The Office, and I thought about writing a role for him in this movie, and I called Jenna up, and I'm like, "Do you like Idris? Is he a nice guy?" And she said he's beyond great. She was telling me about how she was with her publicist at an event, and Idris met her and was so nice to her and looked her in the eyes. And anybody who's in Hollywood knows that there are a lot of people that when they're around a famous person, everybody else seems to disappear. Michael, I have a friend of mine who's a TV actor, and we have a guy who we know who we go to a party with this person, and we can tell exactly where our career is at that time by how much time he spends looking at us versus looking around at other people. He's a very famous person. And it's so obvious. You always know where you stand in the industry by how much this guy looks at you. And that's always something. And that's what Idris is not like. So he came very highly recommended. I wanted somebody who had this gravity about them. He's like a William Money in Unforgiven, a guy who came from the heights of supervillaindom. He shot Superman down from the sky with a kryptonite bullet, and now he's in a prison scraping gum off the floor and has no interest in being recruited into this operation. So I just thought he would be great for that, and I wrote the whole role around him.
Were you ever going to show that reference point to taking down Superman, or was it best left in the imagination?
Yeah, I never thought about showing it. No, no. never really thought it, you know.
You have a great kind of rogues gallery, some of which like are better known than others. Most frankly are not known to most even comic fans. I mean, I don't know most of these characters, and
Yeah.
I still have fallen in love with Polka Dot Man, etc. But there were, as you say, there were different. I know Warner Bros. Was considering different kind of Suicide Squad things. Gavin O'Connor was talked about, etc. Like I know that like Deathstroke was talked about, Black Adam was talked about. Did you consider either of those seriously?
Deathstroke, I definitely considered Deathstroke, and I love Joe Manganiello as a dude. So, but at the end of the day, I just wasn't sure it worked for this movie. But I definitely considered Joe. Yeah.
And in terms of casting, was it important? Did you feel like you obviously have Rooker in there, but for the most part, these are not the Guardians cast. Did you consider some of your Guardians crew, or did you feel that would muddy the waters?
Well, I mean, people know I almost cast Dave in a role, and he couldn't do it, so he didn't. But other than that, you know, well, there might be a Guardian somewhere in the film that no one has seen yet, and I'm so surprised by. Yeah.
Really? The eagle-eyed, including myself, haven't noticed it. Okay.
I've gotten 100 reviews from this movie, and I just am astounded.
Wait, is the person visible, or am I listening?
I'm not going to tell you anything else, Josh.
What?
It's going to be found out as soon as this comes.
I'm sure.
I can't believe people haven't, you know.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I've seen it twice. Now clearly I need to go back a third time.
Yeah.
I reference, you know, kind of like the trauma roots, the horror roots, like that's in there, especially towards the third act of this film.
Yeah.
There's some horrific fucking imagery in this film, James, that I love. Starro is like, you thought the Borg was a scary kind of collective villain. No, this kills that. The stuff in the lab, I don't want to ruin too much, but like, did you revel in kind of like, again, going back to some of those things that obviously doesn't fit the aesthetic, the vibe of Guardians, but you can,
yeah. I mean, listen, I love, when I was a little kid, I found Starro so scary, like, and then he's also so goofy at the same time, and so you know, I just
your cake and eat it too. You can do both.
I get excited by the challenges of a giant pink and cerulean blue starfish that walks like a 2-year-old. That is also terrifying. And how could we make that work? Not to mention he's walking through like one of the most, you know, greatest, you know, looking and most interesting locations in the world. It's like a big Jeff Koons artwork.
I feel like in this film, there are a couple, like Peacemaker stands out to me most as like, there's almost like a gentle mocking of like the classic superhero costumes like that. I mean, his costume is bananas. I think of even you know, Bloodsport, like running around at times with just the helmet. You're like, oh, this is all just so like, how do these grown men live with themselves? Is there a bit of that where like you get to kind of like have fun with that trope?
Well, I think in particular with Peacemaker, I mean, I just wanted every character to look almost like they were from a different genre of film, you know. And these were all successful movies that were made with these different characters from different genres of, you know, soup comic book films, and then they're coming together in the Suicide Squad, even though of course we've never met any of them, except for Harley. But yeah, I think that I was excited about Peacemaker's outfit in general. There's actually, you know, they make fun of him in the TV show where Steve Agee's character says, you know, I'm not sure a bright red shirt and bright white pants are exactly conducive to Luke lurking in the shadows. I mean, it's like the worst possible costume you could ever have, but that's who Peacemaker is. He's like, you know, he's out there, man. He wears short sleeves. That's one of the best things, a superhero costume with short sleeves so that it can show off, you know, how cut he is. Like, that's why, the only reason he would have it like that.
It's so great. It's so great. The I also love, I don't know if you've ever explored this or shot a version of this, or this has been in your mind for a while. There's a portion of a very significant fight that is viewed through a superhero helmet. Like you linger on a reflection for a fight, which is a pretty ballsy thing to do. Has that been something that you've thought of for a while, or just came to you in this one?
It came to me in that one when I guess when I started storyboarding it, you know, so, you know, I write the scenes, but then I started storyboarding them. And a lot of times the storyboards stay pretty much the same as what is in the script. So like the big Harley fight sequence, that's storyboarded very much like what it was written like in the script. Whereas the jungle scene where, you know, you know, Bloodsport and Peacemaker get into their sort of toxic masculinity carnival fight. That was, you know, that kind of just said, you know, they start killing people almost as if they're competing and trying to see who is cooler. And that was all it was in the script. And then I sort of started drawing it and then built it into that side-scrolling video game where things just keep getting exponentially more violent and more ridiculous.
So you clearly fell in love with all these characters. We're going to get a bunch more a Peacemaker in this series that you've completed. Is this one story? Is it episodic? What's the structure of the Peacemaker show?
It's one story over 8 episodes, you know, and it really is an ensemble. It really is the story of Peacemaker, of Danielle Brooks' character, Leota, of the 2 techs from the movie, you know, Steve Agee and Jennifer Holland as John Economos and Amelia Harcourt, and then Vigilante, played by Freddie Stroma, and then Chuck Wudiawuji plays a guy character by the name of Mern. So it's about that 6, and it is really just the greatest. It's the greatest. I love it. I just totally love it. So
similar in tone and violence level, etc., to the Suicide Squad, or does it have its own kind of thing?
It has its own kind of thing. I mean, it definitely is an offshoot of the Suicide Squad in that it's very gritty and very violent. But also we get a lot more of going into somebody's life and seeing really who they are and where they live and what they do and the drama that he has. So it has more drama and more comedy. It just is, it goes into his mind completely and the mind of those people around him. And it's about a guy who, you know, is confronting a world that is very, very different than the world he grew up with, which is what a lot of, you know, white dudes are doing right now.
Right. I gotta think, like, shifting over to the Marvel side of things. I mean, with the way they're turning out these great Disney Plus shows, I mean, your ensemble of Guardians, like, each of them merits their own Disney Plus show or movie. Like, is there talk of that? Would you spearhead? Would you EP? Would you direct a Guardians Disney Plus show? And is there one that's at the top of the list?
There, you know, the one that was always that I, you know, listen, just being honest, and this will be, of course, the thing that everybody gets out of this interview if I say it. Yeah, you know, I always thought the Ravagers would be a great, show.
Yeah.
So whether that was with, you know, Sly Stallone's Ravagers or just even more in depth in terms of the pirates and what they're doing, I think I was always interested in doing that. I told Kevin Feige that when he first visited set, when we were on the Ravagers ship in Guardians 1, I said, should make a Ravagers show. And he said, if this movie's a hit, you can do whatever you want. And there's still no Ravagers show. So I don't know what happened. But the truth is I'm awful busy. So I really don't know what, I mean, I want to do a Peacemaker season 2. So that's the only thing that I'm sort of committed to if it happens at this point.
So you're going to get going pretty soon on Guardians 3 and the Christmas and the holiday special.
I'm going hardcore now, man. I just gave my assistant a, crap load of storyboards to go put together. So yeah,
amazing.
I'm way hardcore into it.
So this is an interesting situation in that I know, look, this was obviously ready to go about 3 years ago. You had the script. I think like the cast had read it or Chris had read it. I feel like I talked to him about it.
Everybody read it. Yeah. Except for Dave. Dave doesn't like reading it till right before he shoots. So, but everybody else has read the script. Yeah.
So I know I've heard you in other conversations, like you're not changing it wholesale. It pretty much is what it is. You're obviously, like any filmmaker, I'm sure you're going to tweak till the last minute and make it as great as possible. But I'm just curious, like, look, you've also talked openly about Rocket being the character you've always kind of related to most, and it being Rocket's story. Can you hint a little bit about sort of like the arc of Rocket from where we saw him in Guardians 1 to what is this third film? What is the final journey of Rocket going to feel like, entail, without, obviously getting into specifics?
Well, I think we just get to know where Rocket, at the very first movie, we see Rocket take his clothes off. We see those scars on his back. We see that he's come from someplace very difficult. And to me, that's always been the center of the Guardians is, how do you make a raccoon talk and make him real? And it's sort of ended up being the saddest story of all time. And it is the saddest story of all time. So Guardians of the Galaxy is the saddest story of all time.
I mean, I was going to say, like, again, we've talked about how the emotion in all your films. I mean, Yondu's death in Guardians 2. I mean, the Cat Stevens music, everything. I mean, it all hit me. I'm sure it hit audiences. Like, do you when you look at your scripts in Guardians 3, do you see those moments that make you well up and you feel like will hopefully connect with an audience?
Definitely. I mean, I can't even tell you how sad it is.
Stay tuned for the saddest superhero movie.
Kills me every time. I can't believe I'm even writing it. I look at it sometimes and I go, what in the world is going on? This is so incredibly tragic. I'm not joking. I do it every day where we're designing all these characters and stuff. And I sit down and I'm like, it's so heartbreaking. It's just Rocket and where he came from and all of that. It's really heartbreaking. And I love him. I love him more than, almost any character, if not any character ever. He's my boy, and I still, every time I watch the last shot of him in Guardians 2, I cry. Every time I watch Drax pet him in Guardians 1, I cry. And now we really get to see where all of that came from, what leads to all of those moments, where, who is he and where is he from? But also everybody else too also has their story. What does it mean to have had these Guardians do their thing over the past few years? What do they mean to each other? Like it's all of that. And the kind of the trilogy comes to an end.
I mean, this will mark kind of a decade for you of living with these comic book films, succeeding at the highest level. And you've talked about both your love of them and also, like, you had some candid thoughts the other day saying, look, a lot of them don't work for me. That's fair criticism. A lot of them don't work for me either. But like, where do you see the next decade? Like, do you feel like you're going to be lured back into the comic book movie fold, or do you feel like you got to kind of like take a significant break in order?
I don't feel either of those things, Josh. I really just feel like I need, I just want to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I'm really enthusiastic and excited about, in the same way I was excited about Suicide Squad. If I can do, try to be, as nearly excited about anything I take on in the future as that, it really doesn't matter to me, if it's a Marvel project or a DC project or Clifford the Big Red Dog or something that I make up myself. I don't really care. I don't.
You missed it. They made that movie. Literally, the Clifford movie is about to come.
Yeah, I want to make the Clifford the Big Red Dog.
I was gonna, the Godfather. Just keep adding the thus.
Yeah. The Back to the Future.
Sure, you've seen Back to the Future. Have you seen the Back to the Future?
You just saw any old Back to the Future. This is the Back to the Future.
Okay, so now Marvel has, obviously, in the last couple of years, they've opened it up. They've got like the keys to the Fox properties, X-Men, Wolverine, Fantastic Four. What are you, as a fan of all of it, most excited to see? What could, if Kevin rang you up and said, hey, here's Wolverine, here's whatever, would any of them? No?
Zero, nothing.
None of those.
Like if Warner Brothers came to me and said I could do anything I wanted, like it's just like, it's got to be something that excites me specifically, Yeah. And I just don't know what that is. Right now, there's nothing. I feel like I'm at a place in my career where I can pretty much do what I want. And I don't, it would have to be something I really, really care about on a creative level. And, and that's not necessarily what the fans think is the biggest property. You know what I mean?
Right. Well,
I mean, listen, what do I like doing? I like taking things that people don't love. I want to, when they offered me Superman, I'm like, well, somebody's going to make a Superman movie. No, it's not like there's never going to be another Superman movie, but who's going to tell Polka Dot Man's story? If I don't tell it, nobody. It'll never get told. I want to put a big villain in there.
Yes.
There's going to be, someday there's going to be, whatever, every single supervillain you can think of, but not necessarily Starro. He's the guy that's going to get left out of having his story told in a big way. So I want to tell Starro's story,
See, there's the punk rock guy we were worried was dead. He's alive and well. That's how it comes out.
When Guardians of the Galaxy was coming out, everybody just endlessly hitting that hammer of, this is going to be Marvel's first flop, and then secondly, nobody wants these characters. Why are they making these characters when we don't have fill the blank,
Right.
And it was just constantly happening. Then it happened with Suicide Squad, and now it's happening with Peacemaker. It's like, Wait to see the movie, man.
How many times do I have to prove I can make you care about the weirdos?
Maybe you won't like it. I don't know, but don't judge it from one line in the Hollywood Reporter.
Right. You've kind of become the de facto one of the guys that always comes out to have to defend the comic book movies when some of the luminaries come out that we all love and respect, like the Jodie Fosters and Scorsese's of the world, say certain things. Does it feel a little exhausting sometimes to be the guy to be like, I love you, Marty, but hear me out here? Or what? Do you feel a responsibility to kind of defend what you've devoted so much of your life and love to?
I don't know. I just think, it's awful. He just seems awful cynical that he would keep coming out against Marvel, and then that's the only thing that would get him pressed for his movie.
Right.
So then he just kept coming out against Marvel so that he could get pressed for his movie. So he's creating his movie in the shadow of the Marvel films. And so he uses that to get attention for something that he wasn't getting as much attention as he wanted for it. And he's one of the greatest filmmakers who's ever existed. I love his movies. I can watch his movies with no problem. And he said a lot of things I agree with. There is a lot of things that are true about what he said. There are a lot of heartless, soulless, spectacle films out there that don't reflect what should be happening. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times I've talked to film directors before they went in and made a big movie and said, hey, we're in this together. Let's do something different with these big movies. Let's make them something different than everything that's come before them.
Yeah.
And then see them just go and just cater to every single studio whim or what's thought of and just be grossed out, frankly. So, he said, well, a lot of what he said was good. And then also, like, he hasn't seen my movie. He doesn't know what my movie is.
Sure.
So, it was irritating.
What do you
I was, my feelings were hurt, and
Yeah.
listen, more hurt by, Coppola comes out and nobody's, who comes out and says they're despicable. That was way worse than when Martin Scorsese said they're despicable. I'm like, all right.
Wow.
That's like,
burn James Gunn at the stake for what he's done. How dare he?
despicable.
Are you excited? I'm kind of curious about Toxic Avenger. Are you curious as a trauma guy that they're doing a Toxic Avenger movie? Do you know about that?
Yeah, sure. I wish Lloyd all the luck. I hope he makes some money. He needs it. He's wearing a cardboard belt over here, as he used to always say to me. I'm wearing a cardboard belt over here. Yeah.
And finally, I'm just curious, you've talked about, like, I get now your criteria. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as obviously you just fall passionately in love with it. But I would love to see you kind of do like horror, like obviously you've produced some stuff. Like, is there a script that you've worked on for years that you can imagine potentially coming back to more in the horror genre?
No, I don't think I have any horror movie scripts left. I think they're all gone after Belko.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, I don't. I don't know. I mean, it's possible, but it really, honestly, anything's possible. This is what's that idea that I like in the moment.
Fair enough. Well, you're a man of your word. As I said, we talked about doing this for a while, and I'm glad, finally, when it was time for you to chat again, you honored your promise. And I always love talking to you, man. And I'm very happy for you that out of this dark hour came this amazing, great film, The Suicide Squad. Everybody should check out. And best of luck on everything. Hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Thanks a lot, Josh. Thanks for everything. I thought we were going for 6 hours, but I guess not.
I got places to be. I don't know about you.
I was like, you got those movies fast. That we need to take at least a couple hours apiece on those movies before, I was like, wow.
You have Guardians 3 storyboards to draw.
I do, dude. Let me tell you, it's killing me. It's so much stuff.
Anyway. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right. Have a good one.
Bye.